Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. First bill for our consideration is the charter school amendments. It's a joint interim bill. It was held till later, so we could deal with any conflicts that arose from the larger charter school bill. The leadership asked me to put this one off, but we're running out of time. And we may, if the major charter school bill that we passed out earlier actually gets heard upstairs. I don't know why it hasn't been so far. We may have to have a second or even third reading amendment on this to conform the two so that we don't have conflicting sections. What I would like to do today is deal with it as it stands right now. It is a joint interim bill, and it does a number of things. It authorizes the charter schools as local education agencies so they can apply for state and federal grants. And that's something we turned out to be important. We modified their application requirements a bit. That's one area where there may be a conflict with the main charter school bill. We modified their funding, and what we're doing there is there's a provision in there in the first year that we get the charter school gets a double funding, and at the Joint Interim Committee, we decided to remove that. The testimony we had from the larger charter school was that they weren't counting on that anyhow and were fine without it. But I understand that it may foul up the Chugwater one that the slip board approved. And so we may have to modify that either here or upstairs. That's that on the charter school funding, that's found, I think, largely in the repealing provisions. And State Department we will welcome in a minute any information you have on that score. We are changing the reporting requirements, and basically this is a technical correction bill, but the funding part of it is a matter of some substance that we need to pay attention to. With that brief explanation, this one came through the Joint Interim Committee, I think, without any particular problem, because it is a series of mostly technical corrections other than that one funding thing. State Department, do you wish to speak to the bill?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Dickie Shaner, Department of Education. Just briefly on Senate File 50, one thing we wanted to bring to your attention, and speaking on behalf of the superintendent, with the other charter bill that's going, the Senate File 174, what we've done in that is instead of making each charter school its own LEA, we made the department the LEA. And so would need to defer to LSO's expertise on exactly how to amend that in, but on Senate File 50, starting on page 1 at the very bottom there, line 13, where it says authority to act as a local education agency, rolling into line 13 of page 2, probably swapping that language out for going to Senate File 174, page 6, starting on lines 11 to 15 on page 6 of Senate File 174. Just to try to get them to match up on that point.
Okay, committee, what I'm going to suggest doing on that is for now sticking with the language that's here, and if 174 moves, this will be behind it and we can conform this to that one. That's a technical thing we can handle either way, but I think it'd be relatively easy to just lift the language out of that so that we don't pass two different concepts. I think either concept works. Any comments on the funding and the repealers there?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I looked up the funding things and I was a little confused as to what they're doing. Are you guys prepared to explain that?
Trent, you want to? I mean, we have, Mr. Chairman, we have gone through trying to figure out exactly how the funding works with the state authorized charter schools, both in the proposed Senate File 174 and this bill, and it is complicated. I think where we're at with Senate File 174 and the amendments that are proposed with that up at this point is to keep the charter schools at 100% of the ADM.
Yeah.
With this one, Senate File 50, as it sits right now.
This one, the repealers, it looked to me like we were repealing the double funding, but there was also a piece when we looked it up that there was a repeal of a provision where you have at one point, instead of a 3-year rolling average, you have a 2-year rolling average to accommodate that they haven't been in existence 3 years. And that was also repealed. And I wanted to get your take on that as to whether that was a problem.
Mr. Chairman, Trent Carroll, Wyoming Department of Education. There was some testimony, I believe at your November meeting when this bill was discussed. And I believe that some of the charter schools provided testimony on that potential impact to them from the repeal of the double funding.
Yes, that's right. We heard from Chugwater, and I am concerned we don't want to sabotage them. But my question, it's 21.3.314. C3, I think. And that's B, C. Okay. 1, 2, 3 is the major. No, C3, 100% amount generated payroll. That wasn't the one that I was questioning. Large C3. For purposes of WS, less than such, and upon charter school operation for 3 consecutive years, school year average daily membership, computed under paragraph 1 of the subsection, charters is subject to subparagraph 1C of the subsection, be divided by 2 in computing the school's ADM averaged over 3 immediately preceding school years. Does that provision cause us any trouble? Or is that merely dealing with the double funding that we may be getting rid of.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that provision is directly connected to that double funding for the first year, and that adjustment would not be necessary if the double funding is repealed.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so if we may need to conform this to the larger bill then on the funding provision and do something about that so we don't mess up the Chugwater School, give them a quarter or half funding. And I think probably the better part of wisdom is to see whether the major bill is moving or not before we do it. Okay, with any further comments from the State Department? In committee, any questions?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here present want to talk on this bill? Mr. DeCaria. And then I saw a hand in the back, and we'll come to you second. And do speak up and close the microphone. We had experience with another committee in here yesterday with the air from the heating system running. This room has bad acoustics to start with, and that makes it much more difficult.
All right. Okay, Mr. Chairman. Ken DeCaria, Wyoming School Boards Association. Mr. Chairman, as this bill is written, and I want to make that clear, this bill, we're okay with this bill as the way it's written. I think it provided some good clarification to the three, charters that were state approved by the SLIB board. And it did provide clarification about several pieces of this. It resolves the issue of who's responsible for the charter school outside of the district, and making them an LEA. And so as this particular one is written, we're okay with that. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to mix this up. If it gets mixed up into the other one, I think that could, we'd probably have a different opinion on that if you're going to pull this into the other bill.
Question for you. If we, on the issue of who's the LEA, if we pull the language from the larger bill that has the State Department doing that instead of the individual charter schools, are you okay with that, or do you have a problem with that?
Mr. Chairman, I think it would be good to make it clear who is responsible for that.
Okay, so that's a clarification that wouldn't cause you to have problems.
Right. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Happy to stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Seeing none, okay. Thank you. Anybody else? I saw a hand in the back. Yes, sir. Tell us who you are and then proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Greg Hunter from Laramie, Wyoming. I didn't get a chance to come down on Friday to talk about 174. I did send an email about that. And I also sent an email to a lot of the interested parties expressing my concern about charter schools in general and whether charter schools would make education better in any way, shape, or form. But I wanted to, bring this book, 1981 Falcon. That's when I graduated. And I wanted to show some statistics about what I consider was an experiment that kind of addressed Senator Beitman's concern or desire that we had world-class scientists or people that had studied other subjects that couldn't go into teaching or found it hard to do teaching. We actually ran an experiment about this in America. We actually kind of forced forced people that were studying to become chemical engineers English teachers or English professors into teaching. So I want to give you some, these are some of my teachers, lots of them. If you go through the data, I had about 97 teachers, 57 of those were males. It's a very interesting exercise to go through your senior year book and read where your teachers came from. So I will pick out one, Mr. Dennis Prizer, he's an example. Mr. Dennis Prizer, by the time I was a senior, had been teaching for 13 years. So if you go back and look at the data, between 1963 and 1973, 43 of the 57 males that were teaching in my high school were hired at that time. They, Mr. Dennis Prizer, wanted to be a chemical engineer. Mr. Dennis Prizer, when he graduated in 1968, because he wasn't all that suave or good looking, could not get married or have a child to get a Vietnam draft deferment. So he took the teaching option. And if you start to count LHS, high school teachers, and run the scenarios, you will find that males are less represented. So we have already proven that if you allow for additional, in other words, if you already have education and you come into teaching, you can pretty much produce a world-class teaching. And if you look at some of the people that were taught, like myself, some of these people are teaching in Wyoming. As a matter of fact, for the last 23 years, one of your professors is teaching the teachers that teach your children today. Well, I'm just asking you to go back and look at what happened in Wyoming, because my understanding is they fired all these Vietnam draft deferment teachers. And I look at that kind of loss of potential education the same as making this decision to do charter schools. You're going to damage children for the next generation going down this path. So I want you to really think about what you're doing here with the charter schools, because in order to get quality teachers and quality education, charter schools don't fix it. You have to pay the correct amount to bring people like Dennis Prizer that taught me into the education system. Charter schools do not solve that problem. Thank you very much. I'll stand for questions.
I'll talk to the majority floor leader as to what he plans to do in the main charter bill as to how we're going to handle this. So, any amendments at this point? Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion is due pass. Seeing no further comment, call the roll, please.
Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Beitman. I'm sorry.
Beitman's excused.
Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
Senator Rothfuss is excused. I expect he's probably presenting another bill elsewhere, too.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
3
Okay,
ayes, 2 excused.
We've got 3 ayes. We'll pass the bill out. I will hold it open for a short period at noontime or so, and to see if the others want to be recorded. And I know both of them were exposed to the bill in the interim. So the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 52, which is special school finance on special education. The bill relates, as you can see on page 2, repeals the section that appears to be fully executed there, referring to school years 1920 and 2020, 2021. And then it deals with the accounting for it, that they're not considered in determining the amount of school foundation program under the education block grant. And just essentially sets us to. I've got to go to another committee, I'll be right back. Okay, thank you. We held the first bill open for your vote. Okay, thank you. It was a joint interim bill. Okay, be right back. Okay. Apologize for the interruption, audience. State Department, any comments on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Trent Carroll, Wyoming Department of Education. We discussed this bill at your November interim meeting, and I'll try to be brief here because we spent quite a bit of time at that meeting walking through the issue. But maybe for the benefit of the new members, really the problem that this bill is trying to address is an ongoing issue that we've had for the last several years with the Federal Office of Special Education Programs and a dispute related to our maintenance of state financial support for the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act funding that we receive under Part B of that act. So at a really high level, I'll give you just a brief explanation of what that requirement entails. It's basically a requirement that is a condition of eligibility for those federal IDEA funds, that a state maintain the same level of state funding for special education from year to year. And the dispute really centers around a disagreement about how we are calculating the amount that we have reported for our state support. And it really goes back to how we fund education generally in Wyoming, with our 25 and our 6 mil being part of that revenue mix that goes into the school foundation program account and provides the resources to each school district for their guarantee. The federal government does not believe that we should be able to include those amounts of revenue in our calculations, and we believe that we should be able to do that. Our state statutes very clearly identify those revenues as state revenues for the purposes of education funding. So we've been working through that over the last several years. This bill essentially would allow us to provide the special education funding through a separate budget unit, which would be something new, and it would basically reduce the school foundation program guarantee for each district and provide the same amount of funding through a separate payment, clearly identified in our budget in a separate budget unit. And we hope that it would just make that whole process a lot more clear and simple and easier for everyone to understand at the federal level. We are continuing to work through the legal process for the prior years, but we feel like this would position us in a way to report those numbers accurately and very transparently going forward in a way that they will understand and agree with. So you'll see in the fiscal note, there was a pretty large number listed there for expenditure increase for FY23 and 24, just over 60, it's 61.3 million for 22 and 59.8 million for 24. But again, I would emphasize that there is a dollar for dollar offset in revenue. So it's really just a change in the mechanics of how we distribute those funds and how we budget the funds, no fiscal impact to the school foundation program account. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, let me make sure I understand, because this is going to be, this fiscal note could cause us a world of trouble up on the floor. What this shows is the school foundation account is costing more, but we're also then offsetting it with, you get an expected revenue increase because of the way we're doing things, an expected decrease. What's producing the revenue increase? So I can explain it, because I can't yet.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would direct your attention to, I believe it's second page, at least the way this printed out for me on the fiscal note, but the LSO staff did a nice job of laying this out. And you can see there with under the non-administrative impact for the anticipated revenue increase, it's the exact amount
Yeah.
that you see listed under the section for the expenditure increase. So it's dollar for dollar. So 61.3 million in revenue increase for FY23 to correspond with the expenditure increase. So it's really just changing
Okay.
the timing.
I see that, but mechanically, where's that revenue increase coming from?
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, with these payments being provided separately in the block grant, you will have an increase in what we recapture from our recapture districts. So their special education funding would be provided to them, and we would have a corresponding recapture amount that would be provided back to the state for each year that they were determined to be a recapture district. The expenditure increase comes from all of our entitlement school districts, and so we would have a separate payment being distributed to those districts for their special education reimbursement each year.
So it's a total shell game.
Mr. Chairman, it's a direct offset.
Direct offset. Okay.
They told me I wasn't supposed to use those words.
It's understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was pretty curious about this bill too. And so my understanding was that you weren't letting the local district retain that money and offset the special education funding like they had normally done. So they pay it into the state and then it's dispersed back to the districts so that it doesn't mess with our funding formula in the maintenance of effort or equity, one of those two. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Steinmetz, you may be thinking of a slightly different issue with regard to our reimbursement for Medicaid school-based services. And we have established a funding flow for those Medicaid payments to come back to the state. So the district has to apply for and receive those as the provider, and then they remit that revenue back to the state annually. And that is to basically protect us from any issues with their local maintenance of effort requirements, which is another federal requirement for these IDEA funds. Is that what you're referring to?
Maybe so, but that's two different things. Okay.
Correct. That's unrelated to this bill.
Okay, so this bill, explain it one more time, how it works with the recaptured districts. So, and for Senator Brennan, explain what a recaptured district is, just so that we have that established as well.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. So we have entitlement districts and we have recapture districts. And the distinction between the two is related to how we calculate the amount that each district receives each year. We call that the School Foundation Program Guarantee. So that's essentially the amount of resources that our funding model identifies for each school district with all of the inputs that have been approved by the legislature. And once we determine that amount for each school district, we calculate how much money they will receive from their county treasurer each year through those 25 and 6 mil levies, ad valorem taxes for mineral and non-mineral property. And if a district will generate less from their county treasurer than their School Foundation Program Guarantee, we provide what we call an entitlement payment to bring them up to that level. We do have a few districts that generate more than their guarantee. And so we typically do not provide any funding to those districts for the block grant. They are fully funded and we would recapture any revenue in excess of their guarantee. So that's the distinction between entitlement and recapture. For this bill, we would now provide their special education reimbursement. So across the board to all districts, those funds would be distributed. For recapture districts, you can probably see how that would change the amount that we would recapture back on the other side from those districts. For the entitlement districts, it's really just a change in the distribution of funds. They would have a separate payment, same amount that they would have received.
And let me further explain on that. Most of the recapture districts, the large property tax surplus that's generated comes from oil and gas production, coal mines, or chrome mines. And the exception is Teton County, where it comes from the billionaires' homes and the property tax on that. And we counted that earlier. Who are the recapture districts currently in the most recent year?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's a little bit fluid this year because of the change in the ad valorem for mineral. We're still collecting the information, and we have several districts that are kind of on that bubble. They may, in fact, become a recapture district this year when they haven't been the last few years because of the boom in mineral prices and production this year. So I don't have a final list for you for the current year, but it's been in the range of 5 to 8 school districts over the last few years.
What was it? Do you remember off the top of your head which ones it was last year?
I can try, Mr. Chairman. I believe it was both of the sublet districts, Teton, Converse. That's all I can come up with right now
Campbell?
off the top. Campbell may have been last year. They've been, I think, a bubble, actually.
And Green River have been right close too, have they not?
Yeah, I can get you that information, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to.
Okay. Further question. What is the total federal IDA funding per year that's involved in this?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's just over $36 million per year.
So it's enough to get our attention.
Yes,
What
Mr. Chairman.
What percent of the total special ed funding is that?
Mr. Chairman, our state special ed reimbursement for the prior year was just under 252 million. So it gives you some idea.
And that would not have included the recapture districts, right?
Mr. Chairman, that would include the total amount reported on our.
Including the recapture districts?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And that 252 million includes or does not include the 36 million federal?
Mr. Chairman, it does not include that.
Okay. So you can see the feds are paying 13% or thereabouts of the total, but it's still 36 million. And that is a warning that federal programs with maintenance of effort can cause a lot of trouble. We have seen that elsewhere. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Further
we
questions, committee?
appreciated your support during the interim, and we would appreciate it again today on this one. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anybody else here present want to talk on this bill? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association. Again, we think that the interim committee did a nice job of working on this. Really is not a big issue for districts. It's going to change a little bit how some of the recapture districts have to work because they won't keep some of that money. It'll come back here and then be sent back to them in a payment. But overall, we think that the interim committee did a nice job. Know that it'll help our state and hopefully get us out of some trouble that we're in there. With that, I would stand for questions, so we support this bill.
Any questions? Thank you very much, sir. Anybody else? Anybody else? Committee, do I hear a motion on the bill? Motion is due pass. Any further discussion, any further questions? I mean, this is all new to, or mostly new to both. the intricacies of dealing with the feds on this are fearful and wonderful.
Mr. Chairman, I went and talked to Matt Wilworth on it a little bit, so.
Okay, yeah, he really understands it thoroughly. Seeing no further discussion, call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman excused. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss excused. Senator Steinmetz?
Aye.
Chairman Scott?
Aye.
3 ayes, 2 excused.
Okay, with the 3 ayes, it's got enough, it's coming out. We'll hold it open briefly. I think the other 2 will probably be ayes on it, and they've both seen this one during the interim. Okay, we are not going to talk about Senate File 168, 175, the hazing bill is Senator Rothfuss's bill, and he's defending another bill in another committee, so we're going to go to Senate File 177. Senator Steinmetz, you're on.
Would you like me to go to the?
You can either present there or there, depending on where you feel most comfortable.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think I'll stay here. It's been a long week already. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm bringing you a 1-page bill. It's a simple repeal of 64302C II, and what that does is it just repeals the exemption for librarians and school teachers in the course of employment at schools from their exemption from the obscenity statutes. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to read what obscene, the definition of obscene is. Obscene is material which the average person would find applying contemporary community standards taken as a whole, appeals to the prudent interests, applying contemporary. Current, excuse me. Applying contemporary community standards depicts or describes sexual conduct in a patently offensive way, and taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. And so, Mr. Chairman, after some of the issues that have come up in our public libraries this year across the state and across the country, there was a gathering at Little America where several parents from across the state and my district also appeared, and this was brought up as a possible solution that would make them feel more comfortable about what was being proposed in our libraries and our schools. And you know, there was a lot of questions from them about why we were exempting this particular section of people. They understood law enforcement, who is also contained in this exemption, but didn't feel it was appropriate for teachers or librarians to be able to bring material that was unsuitable for a parent to bring to their children. So that's the reason for this simple bill. I realize it's not a simple issue. We've had a lot of emails on it, and I still haven't had my questions exactly answered as to why this is good public policy. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Questions? Okay, I will ask a couple. As I read the section that you're repealing it, when I looked it up, it covers the public school librarians. The repealer also covers, I believe, the college librarians are in that protected category, and I was unclear, are the public county libraries that we have, are they in that category?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the other or public library activities in the course of employment of such an organization. So it is my understanding that they are, and you know, obscenity statutes are applied to everyone else equally across the board. The only people they don't apply to is law enforcement and judicial activities in the course of their activities, and then librarians and, in the university and the school and the public library. So that's the cause of concern for me, that we're applying it to everyone else.
Let me raise a question for us all to think about. When you're talking about college libraries, and I would include both the university and probably also the community colleges, the university in particular is a research organization. It strikes me that you're very likely to have from time to time in some of the mental, psychological areas, some of the criminal justice areas, researchers who are doing work on what effect does this pornographic material, obscene material, really have on the consumers of it, so that we have a better understanding, particularly from the mental health point of view, of what stuff causes what kind of harm, and whether there are dangers to other people from behavior that's induced by consuming it. And they are going to need to have access to the actual material so they know what the heck they're studying. So it strikes me with the university, with its research and teaching mission, that they need to have access to that material so that the instructors can understand it, so they can instruct mental health people and others as to what the harms potentially are, and researchers so they can do a better job of defining it. So it does seem to me that the same as law enforcement, that there is a need for researchers at that level to have, and instructors at that level to have access to it. And you're also dealing with the students being adults. So I really question the removal at the college and university level for that reason, and be interested in any comments you have on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I too considered not that specific question, but looking at the definition of obscenity, if you take section C, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. To me, that is a scientific value, what you are attributing, which if we needed to go back in that definition and clean that up a little and include mental health or those types of things, but to me, that is a scientific value, and I believe it would be covered under the definition of obscene in section C.
Okay. Whether that would be effective or not, I'm not clear about it. Maybe we'll hear something from the
Yes, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Okay, audience. We're going to go, State Department want to testify on this? No, okay. Okay, how many want to testify on this bill? Okay, we're just going to start at this end of the room and march that way. Yes, sir. Proceed, give us your name and who you represent, if you represent anybody other than yourself, and proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Scott, members of the Senate Ed Committee. My name is Walt Tribely. I'm the president of Sheridan College. I'm here to speak about some very serious concerns I have with this bill, regardless of the great intent that has been communicated. The bill removes protections for teachers who may be considered to bring obscene material into and near minors. It removes those protections. We teach minors in college. Minors go to college. So we have concerns about the interpretation of groups of people as to what may or may not be obscene. So there's a number of books that books alone are not the only materials, but there's a number of books that we routinely see and value in our society that could be deemed obscene, should that be the intent of a group of folks judging the educators. So my main concern is the removal of protections from criminal prosecution of teachers in the K-12 system, the colleges, and the universities. That's my primary concern with this.
Committee, any questions? Let me then ask one. The minors that you get in your college courses, they would often be, or almost always be, high school students, mostly juniors and seniors, so that people 16, 17,
That's correct.
that sort of thing.
Yes, and they may be taking anatomy and physiology. They may be taking criminal justice, which has to deal with sex crimes and inappropriate use of pornography in our society. These are things that have to be shared. Models of the human anatomy, diseases, conditions of the human condition, genetic conditions that result in structures, we would say phenotypes, but structures that differ from the typical male-female pattern as a result of genetic mutation. These are subjects of science, and they're adult subjects, and they're challenging subjects. And our teachers need to be free to help their students explore under guidance and control and the structure of a classroom. So my concern is about the misuse of this, removal of criminal prosecution protections for teachers.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. And that was, you mentioned science, and so are you aware that in Section C, scientific value is exempted? It's not considered obscene if it's science or it has serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value.
Okay. My concern is about the judgment of the, people making judgments as to whether something is value. It's not necessarily in reading those words with the best of intentions, I'm not concerned. I'm concerned about the or some interpretations of what is valuable. Those are words that the definition is provided by the people creating their point of view. So I'm deeply concerned about that.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So I'm still struggling, and this is where I've struggled with this the whole time, and so please help me and please take this the way it's intended. I'm struggling to understand with this exemption and these words why a certain group of people should be exempted and others aren't. I mean, parents aren't. Healthcare workers aren't. There's all sorts of things. Law enforcement officers are. And so with that wording in there, I'm still just struggling to understand why only teachers and librarians should be exempted when everyone else is not.
I think it's because the nature of their professions not only allow them, but it requires them to make available and to teach subjects that are very broad in nature and not very narrow in nature. So it's part of their profession and they have to do it, particularly in the university levels, but not exclusively. So the very nature of their profession versus healthcare workers and others that you mentioned requires them to show their students the world, to show them different points of view. Different culture determines value, and as you very well know. And so it requires them to show their students these things. So by the very nature of the work, they would be at risk of being considered showing something that's outside of our values. And I'm doing air quotes there, whatever those values are in whatever local situation we're talking about. And that's the conflict, if you will, the necessary conflict. By allowing them protections, there are still many routes that parents have and school systems have through the systems we already have in the state to monitor, control, influence the curriculum, particularly in K-12, not so much in college. So there are already avenues for people to influence it short of throwing criminal charges at folks. And there are situations that, while probably not common, you could see that in a K-12, it's possible that in a K-12 district, the board would even approve a certain set of curricula or books, et cetera, that would be seen as objectionable, and the teacher's caught in the middle. So I'm just concerned about the faithful and essential exercising of the good work that teachers do and have them subject to potential criminal penalty.
All right, thank you.
Let me ask a follow-up question or two. You spoke of the misuse of the statute. The misuse I can see, and I'm trying to find out if you're getting to the same thing, is if you get a prosecutor who gets overzealous either because of his own personal convictions or because he thinks he can make some political points, and prosecutes a teacher who probably is protected by some of the definitional language that Senator Steinmetz was talking about, but you still have a prosecution, which even if the prosecution fails, tars the reputation of the teacher and will chill their ability to teach. Am I understanding what you're getting at properly?
Chairman Scott, members of the committee, that is true. And so I want to make sure that I'm not the attacking intent. I can imagine, it's not hard to imagine, a teacher that comes to school and later after school, that teacher is going to be a part-time teacher at a college or a university. In that satchel that the teacher has, there's materials that they intend to use later on that evening. Those materials taken out of context could very well, if that person is teaching criminal justice, or if that person is teaching one of the humanities that requires us to challenge how we think and how we view in our society. And they're taken out of context by kids and stolen, and they go viral, and then that teacher may be found at the end to not have any criminal penalty, but they're living in a small community. And yeah, I'm just very concerned. Teachers have a large responsibility. And I do believe we have appropriate checks and balances to allow parents and others to exercise their voices and to mitigate or modify and in some cases even direct curricular choices by their local K-12. Universities are by definition marketplaces of ideas. They have to bring the world to their students.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
And this, this is a difficult subject, and the definitions are hard. I can remember a certain Supreme Court justice saying, in an opinion, that he had trouble describing what pornography was, but he knew it when he saw it. Yep. And it is a problem. Okay, who wants to testify next? Yes, sir. And I'm just going to work my way across the room just this way. Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. Chairman Scott, I'm going to start with the point that you just brought up because that was exactly where I wanted to start. We want to talk about these definitions, and the definitions do get tricky. They do get ambiguous to a point that our Supreme Court has even said, I know it when I see it, right? So determining what is pornography and what is obscene this is kind of a root cause to this problem. And what that then leads into is it puts our educators in a number of difficult positions. In the K through 12 setting, that is the teaching of sex education. So we have that in our health standards, right? And it is age-appropriate levels, it is age-appropriate material, but they do have to meet that standard. We implement this, we repeal the obscenities piece, and they're caught between a rock and a hard place, knowing that they have to teach standards, but at the same time, they're also fearful of criminal prosecution because of what materials might be there. And again, the ambiguity and even the Supreme Court's ambiguity on what constitutes pornography or obscenity puts them in this position where it will have a chilling effect on sex education. What we know in those states that have limited sex education, those states that use abstinence-only programs, or in those that don't have comprehensive sex education, have substantially higher rates of teen pregnancy, have substantially higher rates of sexually transmitted diseases. There are additional concerns that we have with this bill. First and foremost, there's a process in place within our local school districts, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit. So local school boards across the state have implemented detailed and effective policies in regards to which materials are available in libraries and classrooms. Library paras must have their book orders approved by a certified librarian before that order can be submitted. The standards that those books must meet are established by the district and detailed and thorough and include content review that includes such standards. And I'm reading from the standards here in Cheyenne, shall support and be consistent with the general education goals of the district and the objectives of specified courses. Shall meet high standards of quality and factual content and presentation. Shall be chosen to foster respect for all people, including gender, minority, and ethnic groups, and shall realistically represent our pluralistic society with its diverse roles and lifestyles. Shall be selected based on the strength rather than chosen because they are inoffensive. And materials concerning controversial topics shall not be avoided. Rather, every effort will be made to represent a variety of points of view in order to help students develop critical analysis skills, those skills that are so important to meeting our standards and have led to our student success. Now, this also leads into the idea of local control, right? Our districts have these established processes. And there have been a number of examples where we've seen across the state that there were some issues. I'm going to bring up the one that was in the city that I grew up in the middle of the state. There was a book in the Kelly Walsh Library that caused significant concern, and I think was one of the impetus for the meeting here in Cheyenne. But what they did, what that local school board did, was they gathered the citizens of that community, the educators of that community, the students of that community, and they sat down and they had a discussion, and they resolved that issue. They developed a policy that resolved that local issue using local input. We should not be legislating statewide this policy that opens up our educators and our school districts to criminal liability when we have processes in place that work. Finally, the last piece, again, that I would really like to reiterate, and again, we've talked about this throughout the interim, is here again, we're discussing the professionalism of our librarians and our educators. This is the tone from the top that we were talking about. They need support. And this bill does not support our educators or our librarians. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Would you, Mr. Mullen, would you consider sex education more about biology than it is obscenity? I mean, when I was there, it was more about biology.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, it's a great question. I appreciate that. I'm even starting to get a little dated, right? So my sex education was done on the old film projectors with the clear film. And but even at that, right, we had anatomical pictures up there. We had discussions about venereal diseases, and there were pictures that, my teacher provided so that you knew what that looked like, so that if something happened, you knew what to be on the lookout for. Again, we're coming back to the subjective standard of the definition of obscenity, right? For some people, for me, that wasn't obscene, right? For some people, that might be. And again, it's that subjective definition that we get concerned about and that will have that chilling effect.
Follow up.
Right.
So do you consider biology to be unscientific?
Chairman Scott, Senator Steinmetz, no, I do not consider biology to be unscientific. It's scientific. But what I'm saying is that those pictures, some people might not find that scientific. We have a wide variety of folks in the state of Wyoming. We have a wide variety of viewpoints. And again, even so much so that subjective standard, our Supreme Court has said, I know it when I see it. That's a troubling standard to put our educators in when they're supposed to meet standards, but at the same time have this threat of criminal charges hanging over their head.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Let me make not so much a question as a request. If you cited some specific data on the difference between the effectiveness of sex education as measured in terms of teen pregnancy and venereal disease rates, depending on the kind of sex education that was being given or not given. If you have a succinct summary of that, I would very much like to see that. That would be very useful information going forward. So that's a request. And I don't know if the other committee members will want it or not. You can ask them, but I would very much be interested in that for purposes really even broader than this bill.
Chairman Scott, I'm happy to provide that.
Okay. And if it's a tome this thick, forget it. I've got a whole shelf in the back, a whole table in my back room full of tomes this big that I'm never going to have time to read.
It'll be succinct.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Who wants to be next? Yes, ma'am.
Is it on? Members of the committee, my name is Lisa Scroggins. I am the director of the Natrona County Public Library, and I want to share with you some concerns that I have about this proposed legislation that removes exemptions for, among others, public libraries and librarians that serve people of all ages. But first, why exempt libraries? Because it's my understanding this legislation addresses distribution of materials that could be considered obscene, and everything that a public library purchases is for the intention of distribution. We purchase items that our communities want and need based on the collection development policies created and approved by our locally controlled library boards. These items are meant to serve all residents of the community. Items by authors such as Ron Francel, C.J. Box, Craig Johnson, and even Nora Roberts would be directly impacted by this legislation. And if passed, this would put county commissioners literally in a hot seat. As you know, Wyoming statute establishes that county commissioners appoint individuals from their respective communities to serve in the role as library board trustees. Those trustees then set the policies that govern the individual libraries, policies that are implemented by directors across the state, such as myself and our respective staffs. If providing access to materials to the public puts library staff in jeopardy of criminal prosecution, those individuals are going to seek damages from their library board who set the policies. I envision a future, if this were passed, where county commissioners will be unable to secure people that will be willing to serve as county library board trustees, which is a legislative requirement. But the liability impact won't stop there. What happens when a person in a public library is arrested for simply doing their job? This is going to create a backlog on our court system that is going to be tremendous. We already know that obscene can only be determined by a judge or jury, as has been pointed out. Even the Supreme Court has a tough job. And we are talking obscene, I think, here, and not pornographic. And if this passes, I see a future where precious public funds are diverted from purchasing materials that our community wants and needs and is diverted to defending staff members for simply doing their jobs. Not to mention the cost of defending libraries against lawsuits from citizens who are denied access to constitutionally protected information and materials. These are just a few of what I consider to be unintended consequences of this proposed legislation, and some of the reasons I encourage you to vote against it. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Question, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question, and thank you for being here today to try to help us grapple with this hard subject. So the library, we're worried about the library distributing C.J. Box's book because it might be obscene. But what about C.J. Box distributing it? I mean, what I'm saying is we're unequally applying this to people. We're exempting librarians and teachers. So the source of it coming from, they would be subject to this law, but not the local library. And so how do you equate that in your mind? Because that's what I'm grappling with. And this is nothing against any particular person or group of people. It's just trying to apply the law fairly to everyone.
Thank you for that question, Senator Steinmetz. So honestly, I am not an author, nor am I a publisher or distributor, so I can't speak to the distribution of other entities and other organizations. But I can tell you that a public library does use public funds and often other funds to purchase materials with the intent to distribute them to their communities based following our policies that were locally designed and adopted for our communities. And this proposed legislation puts us at jeopardy of being arrested for doing exactly that, for doing our jobs and criminally prosecuted. And I will say, it was pointed out earlier, even if it goes, you have maybe an overzealous prosecutor or something. I think Chairman Scott, you mentioned something about that. Even if everything at the end ends up being favorable to the library or the library staff member, this person has been tarnished publicly and probably lost their job and cost both the library as an organization and the county tremendous amounts of monies that are preciously hard to come by.
Just one follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And I appreciate that, and we would never want to cost our counties unnecessary money. However, I would ask you to think about the fact that we're applying the law unequally to the authors you're talking about, to people drawing a picture and, distributing whatever to librarians. And so I'm trying to grapple with that and figure that part out. Thank you.
Thank you, and fair enough, and I will say, so an author usually is not their own distributor, and those distribution companies, for the most part, are not even in Wyoming. So I don't know, I really don't know how to answer that. But the answer is not to put so I believe it's schools, colleges, universities, libraries, and museums at jeopardy of criminal prosecution because we can't figure out the other side. I don't think that's the answer either.
Right, Mr. Chairman. And the rest of us are all in that position. So we're in jeopardy of criminal prosecution if we do something like that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Committee? Okay. Let me ask one question. You were citing a number of authors, and some of them I'm not very familiar with, but they sounded like they were people that wrote thrillers and mysteries and westerns and that sort of thing. How would they don't seem to get prosecuted for selling them. Nobody seems to get prosecuted when the bookstore sells them. What's in there that I could understand when the professor was talking, or the college president was talking about the material that they have to use, and I could understand how an overzealous prosecutor could get involved in prosecuting that. What's in those things that would cause any problem?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question. You're asking
the authors you were citing didn't
Yes.
strike me as producing anything that would fall under this law.
Well, if you have any book that's, so I used, for an example, several authors that write popular, current, like, popular novels. And I use those because if they have a sex scene or a love interest scene that is written into this novel, it depends on the reader. A person could come and say, I find that obscene. And then they start the process. Legally, it may not play out that it's determined in the courts to be obscene, but in the meantime, it has put the library and the library professionals in the court system as being charged with possible obscenity. So I'm reading a book right now by Colleen Hoover. She is one of the hottest female authors in the United States right now. Her bestsellers have waiting lists that are often months long. She does write some very passionate scenes in there. I'm an adult, and if I choose to read that, I'm reading it now because I want to know about Colleen Hoover and read her materials. In Lonesome Dove, there's a rape scene that could be offensive to some people. So we've already heard about the educational components, and let's remember that public libraries as informal education centers that support the educational system and provide materials to learners of all ages when they are doing supplemental work in their educational journey. We're supplying also information as well as the entertainment, but that is our charge, to meet the informational and educational and entertainment needs of our communities.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Who wants to be next? Who wants to be next? Yes, sir, in the back, and then we'll come down here, and then we'll go back there.
Joseph Horther, and I'm on the Albany County Public Libraries Board, and I'm here today to ask you to vote no on this bill to 177. In my public service, I have the opportunity to learn about the intricacies of a library. I've always loved libraries. They're a great community resource, and all across the state of Wyoming, we have great libraries. I wish I was here today to support a bill that raised up our libraries, that supported our librarians, that made it clear that we have a gem of a community service. And libraries stand as one of those entities that really has the community pulse and community interest at heart. So the passing of this 177, the removal of library staff from exemption, puts all of that in jeopardy. And it puts in jeopardy this community-based decision-making process where if people want to challenge materials, there's a protocol that's community-based for them to come forward, for them to challenge, to have a discussion, to move that forward up through the levels, and for to have that resolved at a community level. I don't think the Wyoming State Legislature wants to reverse that kind of community work, right? To see that eroded. Secondly, budgets are really tough. All across the state and every entity, it's really difficult. As a responsible trustee for the Albany County Public Library, I would have to see if this passed liability insurance, protection for librarians, right? And in the day-to-day duties that they have as librarians and staff, to see them subject to the possibility of being prosecuted for doing their job, we'd have to have library or liability insurance. That would just be an undue burden on budgets once more. And lastly, librarians are some of the most skilled, talented, committed members of the community that I've had the privilege to work with. And I think Wyoming would really suffer from an exodus of really highly skilled, trained professionals in our community. I think Wyoming wants to keep and maintain as many of those kinds of folks in our community as we can. So I respectfully ask you to vote no on 177 and to continue to have a law on the books that works effectively without damaging libraries across the state. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you very much, sir.
Welcome.
Next, yes, ma'am, you in the front row, and then you might as well stay up, you're going to be next after that.
Chairman Scott, Senators, thank you for your time. My name is Rachel Crocker, and I'm the director of the Albany County Public Library. And I too have concerns about this bill. I was born and raised in Wyoming. I was raised with values of small towns, of close-knit families. And honestly, I do empathize. I've had conversations with people in my own community, and I empathize with those families who have come across books on library shelves that don't align with their values. My challenge is that at the same time, I know that those same books do align with the values of other families that are in my community. Each of these families deserve the right to make a choice that is best for their family. My job is to support them by providing a range of resources that give them the access to legitimate choice, and to give them the tools to work with these parents to help them identify and know which resources best suit their families. This bill opens up the possibility of criminalizing librarians for doing exactly that. A bill like this hurts the unity of our small communities by producing fear, and it limits our ability to do our jobs by draining time and resources. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for being here today and visiting with us. I did just want to ask you about the definition of obscene. So in section A, it says obscene is a material which the average person would find applying contemporary community standards taken as a whole appeals to the prurient, I can never say that, interest. And then in B, applying contemporary community standards. So what I'm saying is that in the definition of obscene, it requires you to apply those community values. So how does this exemption, I mean, you would, by definition, be exempted anyway, even if we remove the exemption, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I think, Chairman Scott, Senator Steinmetz, thank you for that question. I think, as others have raised, really then the concern comes at what point in the process is that determination made, that this is in line with community standards. And as previous people have testified, currently, we have a system that discusses that. It's our collection development policies that our libraries develop and our appointed boards pass. Our board's appointed by elected officials. And so there's a system in which we do that. There's a place where people can challenge a book, and we have all of that for the community standards. The concern with the removal of the exemption of this law is, where does that determination of value exist? Does it, if a community member has a complaint, is it the Laramie Police Department that makes that initial determination? Is it the prosecutors? Is it the judge? At what point in the process is that value determined? So absolutely, I believe, as we've said, budgets are quite limited. And I think I also look at those community values as well as that final statute, the cultural, educational, scientific value. I believe, along with our collection development policies, that everything that we are purchasing you're right, does not fall. I don't believe I am purchasing anything that would fall under the definition of obscene. I don't believe that those things exist in my library, but there are people in my community who maybe don't agree with that, who don't see that it has value within the community, who would argue that it has cultural value. And so I believe that process exists as it currently does in a civil sphere, where we discuss that within open meetings of our library board, within a process that exists over here. The challenge with this law is that moves it into a criminal sphere. So I see the danger of that value the possibility of that value determination being made by a judge. And even, again, even if I'm ultimately seen as that material does not fit the definition of obscene, we've had to move through that entire process of an investigation, a prosecution, and a judge making that determination.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, sir, you're next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Conrado Saldivar. I'm president of the Wyoming Library Association. I'm kind of altering what I was going to say based so I'm not duplicating so much of the testimony that you've already heard. But I do want to reiterate that staff who are currently protected under this exemption are doing the jobs they were assigned to do. It is in their job descriptions to provide educational, recreational, and informational materials to the communities they serve. If this exemption goes away and a material is determined to be obscene, they are now subject to up to $6,000 per offense and/or 1 year in jail for doing their job based off of something that could be defined depending on who is the jury and who is the judge making the call on if a material is obscene. As it stands right now, this bill does not offer an opportunity for libraries to discard any material found to be legally obscene prior to facing consequences. Because it is a legal term, only a judge or jury can make that determination. Library boards that remove items prior to the judgment may face First Amendment lawsuits. Library boards that don't remove these items prior to the judgment may face misdemeanor charges. This puts libraries, their boards, and their staff in no-win situations. And ultimately, this is going to have a chilling effect on a library's ability to provide constitutionally protected materials on difficult topics that involve human sexuality and other subjects that could be obscene. Wyoming libraries purchase both physical and digital materials locally, but they also share them statewide. Legal confusion could arise if an item is seen as obscene by one community's standards, but is accessible from another community's library. The risks to both libraries could prevent Wyoming residents from getting the materials they can freely access now. And again, circling back to that contemporary community standards, that is really one of the issues we have is who is making that ultimate determination. And as mentioned, the definition taken as a whole, obscenity, section C, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Again, that relies on who is making the call on what is contemporary community standard. And ultimately, we do feel that this is going to have a chilling effect on Wyoming's ability to recruit and retain our librarians in school, public, academic, and special libraries. At this time, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, hold just a second. Anybody else on this side of the room? Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is Andrew Schneider. I'm with the Wyoming Arts Alliance, and I am also the chair of the board of directors at the Nicolaysen Art Museum in Casper, Wyoming. And I just wanted to quickly remind folks, I haven't heard it in the discussion this morning, that museums are roped into this whole show as well. And Mr. Chairman, there was a question earlier from Senator Steinmetz asking, why is this good policy? And museums are places where we meet to discuss our past, to explore other cultures, and to have discussions about the topics of the day. And so in our libraries, our museums, and in our schools, that's really where the vetting happens about what is legitimate literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So I'm here today on behalf of our members, the museum employees, and our constituents. I also want to share that the Colorado-Wyoming Association of Museums stands opposed to this. We ask you not to change these protections for our workers. In the one case, we already have processes for community standards. If we don't meet those community standards, we don't get the funding and philanthropy from our community, and we have to shut our doors. On the other hand, I just want to point out that the effect of this, while it may not result in more litigation, maybe this doesn't create a clampdown type of effect, but it does send a message to those workers that they should get out of Wyoming. We have dozens of museums across the state who do great work every day for our communities. We're incredibly valued in our communities, and it's hard enough for us to attract and retain qualified, competent, exceptional workforce, and this hurts more than helps. So with that, I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Let me ask one question, which I may then ask the sponsor of the bill. Are museum employees specifically involved in this bill in the section that's being repealed or not?
Yes, the word museum
They
is
are.
included with libraries, schools, colleges, universities.
Senator Steinmetz, is that correct? Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thanks for taking the time to listen to many of these concerns. As I understand it,
Give us your name.
my name is Tyler Sesser. I'm a concerned parent from Natrona County. As I understand, this bill is a result of concerns heard at Little America in particular about what parents were able to, what their kids were seeing in school. So that kind of prompted this bill is what I understand. Well, that same concern played out in Natrona County. And as a parent, what I appreciated was the process that we got to engage in Natrona County. And what I see is maybe part of the process that's missing here. It's really hard for a lot of parents in Natrona County to be able to come down today to testify before you about, their concerns with this bill, either for or against this bill. Without virtual testimony, a lot of folks aren't able to contribute those concerns either. Whereas with our local school boards and our local libraries and our local systems, we're able to go in and have these discussions. The Natrona County School Board spent about 22 months investigating two books in particular. I think this was mentioned by a speaker before, so I'll try to be brief in these. So they were first considered based on some parent concerns that were brought up. They were then reviewed by a committee, and then the board decided to retain those books. And then a reconsideration committee was made. More parent comments, more conversations were had, and then it was brought before the school board yet again to be considered. Now, these two books had been checked out maybe less than 20 times, and we spent 22 months considering them. But that was important for us to be able to, as parents, express those views and those concerns, and to be part of that deciding of what is that community standard, what are our shared values, and to be a part of that instead of that being relegated to now a judge or a jury that we don't have as much say in, and making this a criminal case. So that kind of is my first concern. As a parent, you're taking away that local control. You're adding more government into this by making it something that I can't participate as a citizen in Natrona County in that definition. Today, I've heard a lot of kind of confusion amongst the committee about what is covered, what isn't covered under this exemption, and whether or not we have the exemption. I just think about our teachers and librarians sitting in their office wondering, as that book comes across, is this what criminalizes me? Is this what's going to give me a charge of $6,000 if I give this to this youth who came in asking for that book, or is it going to put me in jail for a year? If the committee is unable to answer that very quickly in deciding to pass this, I think for teachers and educators, it'd be really hard to have that kind of safety and feeling of comfort in our school, which leads, I think, to what others are saying, that excess in our school. The exemption, I think, again, as the previous speaker pointed out, is good policy because one, it tried to make maybe bad policy a little bit better. Maybe part of our conversation would be to review that full obscenity bill in its entirety and whether or not there should be more exemptions for parents or for others. I think about homeschool parents and folks that maybe want to have these at home, that maybe should be their decision and not criminalized. This bill would make even that still criminalized and still something outside of their reach. So with that, I'll stand for any questions, and thank you for taking the time today.
Questions, seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, public testimony is closed. What's your pleasure on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, if it would please you and the committee, I would like to present this as an interim topic and hold the bill for that.
Okay, so we will, if that's all right with the other members of the committee, we'll figure that this one is maybe not quite ready for prime time and needs some more work. And that's perfectly right, and we'll honor the sponsors' election on that. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Committee, that means this bill will not move forward at this session because it's not going to come up again. So that's the decision. The next one we've got, which we held back because you were busy defending another bill somewhere else, is Senate File 175 hazing. Senator Ruffus, your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Senate File 175 hazing.
Give the audience a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Shuffle time. Thank you, everybody, for traveling to come here. Appreciate it.
Okay, go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate File 175 hazing is legislation that was drafted, I think, 2 years ago, during the interim by the Education Committee at the request of students from the University of Wyoming, ASUW, and the Greek community in their interest to have a little more uniformity and understanding about what hazing is throughout our school system. The impetus for it generally was that there was a lot of different thought, a lot of different belief on what actually hazing was, and that when people came to the university, that caused problems based on the fact that there really wasn't a common theme in the K-12 education system throughout the state, or the colleges, or the university. There was some discussion of how to proceed with that, whether to force some uniformity, whether to make it a crime, in fact. There was discussion about that. That's done in other states where hazing is an explicit criminal offense. That was something that we rejected early on to create a new crime. Either it's criminal behavior and other statutory endeavors, or it's not, but it didn't necessarily need its own criminality. But we put together a working group. We worked with students from the University of Wyoming, students from the community colleges, the Community College Commission, the university administration, a few legislators, the Wyoming School Board Association, put together a good team to figure out how best to move this forward. And it was an effort that was led by ASUW and the president of ASUW at the time, Riley Telemontes, did the bulk of the work in investigating what an appropriate path forward was. We vetted that through the working group, and this is the bill that was the product of that. We passed it through the Education Committee, but we didn't get it through the legislature a few years ago. And some students from the University of Wyoming who are joining us here today, and will probably provide some public comment in a little bit, asked that we bring it back and take another look at it, because the same problems that they were experiencing at the time, the same interests that they had at the time, continued to remain present. And honestly, I still think this is about the best solution we could come up with. So with that, I'll briefly walk through, but the bill just effectively does two different things. One is establish a uniform baseline definition for hazing. And the second is to ensure that hazing is a part of policies for colleges, the university, and K-12 schools. Again, it's not prescriptive in how those policies are implemented, other than the fact that there's a desire to have that uniformity of a definition. So we see on page 2, definition in Title 21 as used in this act. The Romanet 3 is hazing means an intentional act or situation that is committed or created for the purpose of membership or affiliation with a group, team, or other person, and that causes embarrassment, harassment, or ridicule, or risks emotional or physical harm to a student or employee. Hazing can occur regardless of the person's willingness or consent to participate in the act or situation. And that may well be the best definition of hazing in the country if we adopt it. So much work went into that definition. I'm really proud of the students that put it together. They got an A on that assignment. Bottom of page 2, on to page 3. This is language that is adapting school district language and provisions where we already have bullying legislation in place. We did a bullying act, Mr. Chairman, 8-10 years ago. I can't remember exactly when we passed that piece of legislation, but it's a good piece of legislation that basically requires school districts to have policies in place related to bullying and provides broad discretion on what those policies will be, but provides some minimum requirements for those policies. This simply adds hazing to that list, so it's incorporating hazing into the bullying policies. It doesn't require substantial changes other than a reflection on this definition as a part of that change. And then you see conforming language, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. Yep, that's correct. So all of that is incorporation into our existing law related to bullying, harassment, and intimidation, adding hazing to that, and then a reflection back onto the definition of hazing, which you see bottom of page 6 onto page 7, district board generally duties. You see the Romanet 12 is adopt a policy prohibiting hazing. The policy shall include a definition of hazing, which includes at a minimum the definition as provided above. We're trying to create a uniform, consistent definition. It can be amended, it can be added to, but it needs to be consistent with that so that all of our students throughout the state have a common understanding of what hazing is based on a common policy set by the school districts. On to section 2. You see in the A paragraph that the Department of Education shall develop model policies applicable to K-12 related to hazing. This is consistent with what we've done in a few other areas where developing model policies through the State Department of Education can serve as guidance and guidelines for best practices, and we'll leave that up to the Department of Education to do that. You see not later than July 1, 2024, so that's quite a bit of time that would be provided, a full year effectively, so that they can look to the model guidance that would be developed by November 1st, 2023. Each school district shall adopt a policy prohibiting hazing. Not later than the same date, July 1st, 2024, the University of Wyoming shall adopt a policy prohibiting hazing, which is consistent with that definition. And then, unsurprisingly, the D paragraph, not later than July 1st, 2024, community colleges shall adopt a policy prohibiting hazing that's consistent with this. To be clear, all of the colleges and the university, and I believe every school district, has some type of a hazing policy, rules and regulations, something in place right now. They're just not consistent. That was really what we heard, and sometimes insufficient. The request of the students then and of the interest groups that promoted this education topic as an interim topic was really to try and provide some uniformity and elevate the discussion and understanding of hazing, not necessarily to be authoritative and provide any mandates. So that's what the bill does. I know that we do have some public testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions and appreciate further consideration on Senate File 175.
Questions for the sponsor? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to go to page 5, line 17 and 18. So we're inserting hazing, harassment, and intimidation. I know you went through that fairly quickly, and I know we have a lot to do before we get to the budget amendments today, so I don't want to hold you up too much, but just a little more explanation on that. And then if we're just creating uniformity, why is it's just a shall in that subsection 2, not a may? So to me, that doesn't sound like it's very optional. So if we could start there.
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. So with regard to lines 17 and 18, this is one of the few places in this act where it simply says bullying. The previous legislation and the previous statute has harassment, intimidation, or bullying almost throughout. So that was more of a little correction to conform its language with the previous language of harassment, intimidation, or bullying, and then to add hazing to those provisions. So that's the reason why it's a little bit unique there. Everywhere else, you just see the addition of hazing to harassment, intimidation, or bullying. And harassment, intimidation, and bullying is what is defined on, I believe, A Romanet 2, which we don't have before us, and I don't think I've got my statutory construct right now. But it is defined as a phrase on the intimidation, harassment, or bullying, which is, and bullying individually is not defined. That's the reason for the little correction on lines 17 and 18. You kind of need those together. Looks like it was a little bit of an oversight in prior drafting. With regard,
Before you move on with that, though, just with the regard, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. So the other parts are reporting requirements where it's, when you're talking about harassment and intimidation, this is saying they have to adopt policies. So I think that is a little bit of a change, and correct me if I'm wrong, please.
Mr. Chairman, the other part is reporting requirements. I'm not following.
So on page 4, procedures for reporting and documenting acts of harassment, intimidation, or bullying is where that was located in other places in the bill. A strategy for protection, a process for discussing, but this says you shall develop a policy. And so it's to me, that's different. That's a little bit different.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the question now from the good senator. It's certainly not intended to be different because it literally is a policy that we have, this Safe School Climate Act, which was 24-4-311, that required implementation of a broad range of policies for each school district to create a safe school climate. That was the act that we passed a few years ago that required all K-12 school districts to adopt policies, plural, that would address harassment, intimidation, or bullying specifically in all schools. So when we say in this, adopt a policy, it basically means go back into that Safe School Climate Act set of policies that were developed and incorporate this hazing component, which was not a part of the Safe School Climates Act when it was originally adopted. And it's Romanet 1, my apologies, that was the definition under A of, it's an odd little definition. Harassment, intimidation, or bullying is literally what is defined. I'm happy to read that or just hand it over to the senator if she wants to read it. All right. And Senator, with regard to the shall on page 7 and the shalls afterwards, again, that's intentional. There's already effectively a shall in place for each school district shall have policies for the Safe School Climate Act. This basically says the department shall develop model policies. And that's exactly what we said in the previous 2 bills where we asked them to develop model policies. We didn't say the department may develop model policies with regard to the last 2 bills we passed. We said shall. If we wanted to put a may, if they objected to developing these model policies, we could, or if we wanted to lay the deadline back, we can. I guess I'd be surprised the Department of Education was particularly offended by having to develop model policies, although they might be offended by the November 1st timeline. I know that if this is the 3rd bill we stacked on top of them, they might like a later date. I bet we hear that in public testimony. I haven't pre-cleared that question.
Move on.
Yep, happy to.
Okay, I'm starting to worry about time pressures. Yeah, and I'm going to want to start. I think we've got a set of students over here. Want to hear from some of them first. Who wants to be first? Okay, yes.
I'd invite these 2 that have worked with me and were the requesters.
Okay,
They're sort of the internal sponsors. Yep.
tell us who you are and what you think.
Thank you for riding over and breaking the road. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee. My name is Mason Brummel. I am a student at the University of Wyoming, and I currently serve as the Vice President of Governmental and Alumni Affairs for the Interfraternity Council.
Thank you, committee and Mr. Chairman. My name is Elena Jarzeski. I am a student at UW, and I serve as the College Panhellenic Association Vice President of Governmental Alumni Affairs, which is the governing body of all sororities on campus.
Okay, proceed.
Thank you for having me here today. So my name is Mason, of course. I was born and raised in Torrington, Wyoming, and I'm here to advocate and support Senate File 175, an act relating to hazing. The common narrative surrounding hazing is focused primarily at the college level, with fraternities and sororities obviously being at the center of this conversation. While this is often the case, hazing, harassment, intimidation, and bullying can and does happen at all education levels. I would love to give this committee and the citizens of Wyoming concrete facts and figures pertaining to the hazing epidemic that we see in Wyoming, but in fact, no such numbers exist. But I am confident that this law can change this unfortunate fact. Wyoming is one of 6 states in the United States that does not have hazing prevention and reporting laws on its books. It is critical for the safety of students in this great state to feel safe and protected emotionally, physically, and mentally while they are at school. Hazing is a problem that touches every aspect of a student's life. From athletics to music, social clubs, and even after-school activities, every student that is a part of an organization faces the risk of being hazed. Researcher Sydney Chain looked deeply into this issue of hazing in athletics and found that, quote, hazing leads to both short-term and long-term health ramifications that can affect an individual's athletic success and ability to participate in sports. Even outside of athletics, hazing can and does have a severe impact on the mental well-being of those affected. Douglas Richmond, an expert in fraternity hazing, found that, quote, purely psychological methods of hazing, such as telling pledges that they have failed fraudulent, quote, national examinations, have left pledges emotionally affected to the point that they have developed speech impediments. We know that hazing is happening in our own backyard, but we lack the resources and laws that can help students recognize and report hazing. We see this Kelly Walsh High School in their 2018 incident, Riverton High School in their 2018 incident, and Natrona County in 2014 are just a few examples of hazing incidents in Wyoming public schools that put this state in the headlines of some of the biggest news organizations in the world. TIPS, a renowned education resource on alcohol safety, found that 9 out of 10 college students have experienced hazing but do not consider it as such. This bill is the only way to bridge this gap. Richmond again states that, quote, a prerequisite for controlling or eliminating hazing is to develop an institutional policy defining and prohibiting such behavior. Ensuring that schools are equipped with a standard definition of hazing, are trained on specific hazing education, and have the skills to combat this issue is the first and greatest step we as a state can take to combat this issue head on. As I read through the countless studies related to hazing at virtually every single education level and institution, a common theme emerged. In order to combat hazing, schools at every level must acknowledge, report, and discuss this issue. As Raquel Botello states in his groundbreaking book into the topic of hazing and mental health, quote, prevention is the best intervention when we address hazing. I urge this body to vote in affirmative for the legislation for the safety of our children. This bill will be our first big step in combating the stigma, secrecy, and endemic problem of hazing in Wyoming. I urge you to think of the children as you cast your vote today and put their needs above all else. Thank you.
We'll ask you, and then we'll have questions for both of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Elena. I'm here to advocate for Senate File 175, hazing and act relating to hazing. When I learned that the state of Wyoming had no laws to prevent hazing, I felt immediately compelled to do something about it. When you first hear the word hazing, your mind goes straight to fraternity and sorority life, but this is not the only community affected by it. Varsity athletics, band members, students involved with theater, speech, and debate, and other organizations can and have been victims of hazing. And while it may not seem like it's happening in our own state, there's been numerous incidents over the years. To name one, a student at Kelly Walsh High School in Casper was a victim of hazing in just 2018. According to an article written by Fox News, the student was waterboarded by his own wrestling teammates. Quote, the teammates reportedly reported poured water into the teen's mouth, which was covered with a towel, until he began to choke, the report said. The attackers reportedly told the teen that he would be waterboarded again if he told anyone about the attack, end quote. A statewide policy for hazing would prevent the fear that these children have of not only experiencing hazing, but reporting it. Author Hank Newer has dedicated his life to researching the effects of hazing and created a database to track any and all hazing incidents. According to this database, there have been 285 deaths related to hazing in fraternity and sorority life in the United States since 1838. That is 285 too many. 285 children who have lost their lives to acts that were entirely preventable with the right regulations and education. 570 parents who have had to lose their children and bury them way too young. I urge you to vote an affirmative on this bill today, if not for the boys and girls in Wyoming schools, then for the safety and security of your own children. An affirmative vote for Senate File 175 is an affirmative vote to protect our children. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Langston Boma, and I serve as the Interfraternity Council President, as well as I am an ASUW Senator and sponsor of an ASUW resolution in support of this bill, which you will be hearing from a later speaker. I'm here to offer a couple statements of support from some resources on our campus, and I'd like to start first off with our University Counseling Center. The University Counseling Center, UCC, supports ASUW's Senate resolution calling for reintroduction of anti-hazing legislation in the Wyoming State Legislature. According to research, 71% of individuals who experience hazing suffer from negative social, emotional, and academic consequences. Universities and organizations can also experience negative consequences from hazing, including loss of reputation, recognition, or trust. The UCC supports any efforts that aim to prevent hazing and resulting consequences at the educational level. The next statement of support is from our Green Dot organization at the University of Wyoming, to whom it may concern in the Wyoming State Legislature. I am writing to express my enthusiastic support for the anti-hazing bill being proposed by the Interfraternity Council, College Panhellenic Association, and the Associated Students of the University of Wyoming. My name is Michelle DePasquale, and I am the Violence Prevention Program Manager at the University of Wyoming. My position involves education and trainings to prevent power-based personal violence, specifically sexual assault, dating/domestic violence, and stalking. Unfortunately, hazing behaviors can include acts of sexual violence, and the earlier students learn about these problematic behaviors, the better we can be at preventing it. Additionally, hazing behaviors can lead to other forms of harm and humiliation, which are detrimental to student success. As stated in the proposed Section 3, hazing can occur regardless of the person's willingness or consent to participate in the act or situation. Consent is vital to setting boundaries for ourselves, and including the word consent in the updated bill will be very helpful in practicing consent in K through 12 and in college. I stand behind the University of Wyoming students bringing this bill forward and hope you will choose to update the language in this bill to include anti-hazing initiatives. Sincerely, Michelle DePasquale. I would also offer to have a few words of my own. I'm originally from Wasilla, Alaska, but I'm a junior here at the university. And as someone who is planning on probably spending a majority of my life here in this state now, it's a state that I'm proud to call home, I am concerned for my children's future that I'm going to have to worry about plenty of different hazing incidents that have already occurred in this state, and just supporting this legislation could help really prevent anything else and hold people accountable for their actions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. Who wants to be next? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. Good morning, members of the Education Committee. My name is Cameron Murfitt, and I live in Laramie, Wyoming. And I am the Director of Student Outreach for the Associated Students of the University of Wyoming Student Government, as well as an officer on the Interfraternity Council. I have come to testify on behalf of all UW students and ASUW to show my support for Senate File 175. Before I go into a personal statement, I would like to read the resolution that previous speaker had talked about a little bit. So ASUW in December 6, 2022, passed Senate Resolution 2843, ASUW's support of the reintroduction of anti-hazing legislation in the Wyoming State Legislature. And it reads as follows: whereas the purpose of the Associated Students of the University of Wyoming, ASUW, is to serve our fellow students in the best manner possible, and whereas the University of Wyoming defines hazing as any intentional or unintentional act that would endanger the mental or physical health or safety of a student for the purpose of pledging or associating with, being initiated into, affiliating with, holding office in any organization whose membership consists primarily of students, and whereas the presidential directive from 2016, referenced in Addendum A, provided examples of what hazing could be constituted as, and whereas ASUW, the College Panhellenic Association, and the Interfraternity Council have contributed several years of work on addressing hazing at the University of Wyoming and in the state of Wyoming. And whereas members of the 107th administration of the ASUW, as well as CPH and IFC, have lobbied the Wyoming legislature, urging lawmakers to pass an anti-hazing policy and procedure for K through 12 schools and higher education institutions. And whereas the 107th and 108th administrations of the ASUW worked with the Education Committee on the Wyoming State Legislature to craft a definition of hazing and a policy that would require K through 12 and higher education institutions to educate their students about what hazing is and why it is dangerous. And whereas the 109th administration of the ASUW passed Senate Resolution 2754, the Anti-Hazing Education Act of 2021. And whereas number 2754, alongside advocacy efforts with IFC and CPH, resulted in Wyoming State Legislature introducing Senate File 59 in 2021 as referenced in Addendum B. And whereas Senate File 59 unfortunately did not progress in the Wyoming State Legislature in the 2021 legislative session. And whereas previous legislation in the Wyoming Legislature that made hazing a criminal offense were not supported by the ASUW. And whereas despite the efforts of the ASUW, CPH, and IFC, recent changes in the legislature have made it difficult to get a bill on hazing passed. And whereas the University of Wyoming has not documented any hazing events on campus since 2007, as referenced in Addendum C. And whereas students in the fraternity and sorority community are required by their national chapter organizations to take trainings that include anti-hazing education, and whereas UW Athletics also participates in anti-hazing training for their athletes. And whereas the ASUW does not believe that these systems currently in place sufficiently meet the needs of the UW campus. And whereas there is no policy at the University of Wyoming that requires student organizations to conduct anti-hazing training or participate in anti-hazing education efforts. And whereas the ASUW does not require members of the three branches to undergo anti-hazing training. And whereas this body recognizes the difficulty in mandating anti-hazing training to student organizations and is committed to work with the student organizations and entertainment office on distributing information and facilitating educational opportunities to student organizations at the UW.
Okay, let's wrap this up because we're on time pressure and you're in danger of talking the bill to death.
Okay, I'll just move to my personal statement then. Hazing has been a widespread issue in this country for many years. The definition of hazing as in the Senate file states that hazing means an intentional act or situation that is committed or created for the purpose of membership or affiliation with a group, team, or other person, and that causes embarrassment, harassment, or ridicule, or risk emotion and physical harm to a student or employee. Many times when people think of hazing, they think of Greek life during a pledge or new member process, like for instance, the hazing that led to the death of a male student at Bowling Green State University in 2021. After members of a fraternity he was pledging hazed him during an event. The initiated members at the event forced him to consume large amounts of alcohol in a short period of time, and then the members of the fraternity took him to his apartment, where his roommate found him later unresponsive before he died 3 days later. The Lucas County coroner ruled that he had died of fatal ethanol intoxication during a hazing incident. That is not the only instance of hazing incidents that has led to death of a student. According to the University of Maryland, who gathered national statistics on hazing, there have been at least one hazing-related death on a college campus each year since 1970. They also found the statistic that more than half of college students are involved in some form of campus hazing during their time at school. This is terrifying as a student going to college and wondering if you are going to be a part of that 50% that gets hazed. I'm lucky to have never been hazed, as being in college for 2 years now. But as a freshman, I was so fearful that I would go to an event or a function that I would be leaving feeling violated because I was hazed. Hazing, however, doesn't just happen in college. It can happen everywhere, and it has happened in my old town, Riverton, Wyoming. In 2018, when I was in high school, there was a hazing incident involving our wrestling team. 3 students had physically assaulted and sexually harassed 8 victims, which were, some were my friends, on January 4th during a bus trip to a wrestling competition in Douglas. Those 3 wrestlers were expelled, and a judge from the Natrona County Circuit Court sentenced 2 of the wrestlers to 20 days in jail, with an additional 5 months and 10 days in suspended jail time. We need the legislation in this state that will help lower the amount of hazing incidents, as well as legislation that accurately defines hazing and its consequences and policies. We are one of 6 states that don't have anti-hazing laws, and I believe it is time to make one. So I implore you to vote for in favor of Senate File 175. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak and offer any answer to any questions you might have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No questions. Thank you very much. Audience, we're about to run out of time, and I want everybody to get a chance here. So I'm going to ask people to be very blunt and to the point, and I'm going to come over to this side of the room. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Scott and committee representatives. I'll make this brief. My name is Steve Milia from Cheyenne. 55 years ago, a friend of mine named Tom Dipple hung himself because of bullying. I'm against bullying in all forms. I support this bill. I still remember Tom Dipple 55 years ago to this very day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Good morning, Mr. Chair, senators, and members of the committee. My name is Grace Cromody. I'm a junior at the University of Wyoming and the president of Chi Omega, Greek life organization on campus, the largest women's fraternity in the nation. I'm here on behalf of the University of Wyoming students to ask for your support on Senate File 175 titled Hazing. I feel strongly that our community deserves legal protection against hazing. Students in our state, before they even attend higher education, have already experienced hazing in some form. A study in 2008 found that 47% of students came to college already having experienced hazing, and it's reported that 55% of college students involved in sports teams and organizations experience hazing. Surveys also found that 95% of students who have experienced some form of hazing have not reported what has happened to them. 36% of students have said that they would not report hazing, primarily because there was no one to tell, and 27% felt that adults or those with authority won't handle it right. As only one of 6 states that does not have an anti-hazing bill, I'm here to say our students deserve better. This bill will prompt local schools at the University of Wyoming to protect students of all ages from hazing, as well as give them the opportunities to engage in sports, music groups, clubs, and organizations without the fear of being embarrassed, harassed, or ridiculed. Senators like you have a responsibility to support Wyoming students, and the passing of this bill would do just that. A bill like this reaffirms that students can get involved, join clubs, play sports, and thrive in school with nothing to prove but that they have the passion for involvement and a willingness to try. Anti-hazing legislation ensures that teachers, coaches, mentors, friends, teammates, classmates, and the community have a clear, common stance on anti-hazing. We need your support to ensure no student in Wyoming experiences hazing in their lifetime. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Wanda Maloney. I'm with the Wyoming Department of Education. I just want to address some of the comments that were made earlier. On behalf of the superintendent, we have no objection to standing up these policies, and then we also believe that we can meet the timeline set forth.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. Grady Hutcherson, President of the Wyoming Education Association. As we strive to provide a safe and just classroom and school for all students, we are in full support of Senate File 175, and kudos to the amazing job of the students in the room. Thank you.
Motion is due pass. Discussion or amendments? Discussion or amendments? Call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman excused. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Steinmetz?
No.
Chairman Scott?
Aye.
3 ayes, 1 no, 1 excused.
Okay, the bill, will ask Senator Beitman for his vote. With the 3 aye votes, the bill will be reported out. Okay, that I was afraid we would get hung up there. And let me explain a little to the students, since we do have a minute or two. I had to leave some time in case somebody wanted debate or amendment up here. This is a very rapid session, the nature of things, trying to get things done with a constitutional 40-day session and all the issues we have to handle. We do have to be relatively brief about things, and a good rule in testifying for a committee under these circumstances is to be very blunt and to the point. And so, because I was afraid we were going to talk the bill to death. I've seen that happen to bills, and that's literally talking it to death. I can remember Professor T.A. Larson at the University of Wyoming, member of the House when I first came in, talking his own bill to death up on the floor of the House. It is very possible. So there's a great virtue in presenting to the legislature to be blunt and to the point. And blunt because we get hit with so many things, innuendos and whatnot, we simply don't figure out. Be blunt. And you're pretty clear what you were for and against. So that was very good. So we appreciate you coming over. And I'm sorry I had to hurry a couple of you along, but I was watching the clock. So thank you very much. Committee, we're adjourned. We're going to deal with Senate File 1.